Welcome again to another edition of Five Questions, a conversation that appears here on the Rick Hamada program on News Radio, 830 KHVH, also on KHVHradio.com and on HawaiiReporter.com. You can log on to both and listen now. It is a delight to welcome back, actually, our first repeat guest for our Five Questions series in light of the news generated by former Congressman Charles Djou. And Charles, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back again. I appreciate it, Rick.
Well, the news of the day is that you're coming back into congressional politics, and first of all, we welcome you.
Thank you.
Let me go through the five questions with you, and let's get a feel for where we are today.
Yeah.
Number one, Charles, is probably the most obvious, the compelling reason to run for Congress again, and well, is there something this time around that leads you to know that you could win this race?
Certainly. Let me begin, Rick. It all boils down to one word, really, very simply. It's jobs.
Yeah.
When I first started running for Congress 3 years ago, the national unemployment rate was above 9%. It's still above 9%. When I first started running, it was the economy was exceptionally slow and not growing fast enough. Well, here in Hawaii, as well as across our country, it's still seeing anemic economic growth. Indeed, actually, made a turn for the worse. There was some recent economic reports from various financial institutions that our nation may be tipping into recession again. And now, of course, what is different? The debt of our nation, for the first time in American history, has been downgraded. And amidst all of this, we see a Congress that has become bitterly divided on partisan lines. We see them exceptionally polarized. And we have a Hawaii delegation in particular that has become isolated and vulnerable in Washington, D.C. because of their lack of bipartisanship and an ability to talk to both sides of the aisle. And I believe we need a representative who understands that we need someone who can talk and work with Republicans and Democrats alike. I have built a record of doing just that as a state representative, a city councilman, and as a congressman. And I think when the people of Hawaii look at my record and compare it with what we currently have, of how current representatives have really swung so far to the left and so firmly planted themselves in the partisan side of the Democratic caucus, that we need something different.
I did the key to victory I want to come to in a moment, but on that line, I recall in your service as a city councilman that you did not vote, you never voted for a tax increase, and very proud of that, understandably so. But would that belie some of the aspirations to be bipartisan? And would that be perceived as bipartisan if you were intransigent on issues such as tax increases?
Rick, I've never voted in favor of a tax increase, whether as a city councilman, state representative, or congressman. I have no intention of voting in favor of a tax increase. But what's more important to me is making sure we address and fix the major problems facing our nation. We've got to get our spending under control. We've got to reduce the gigantic, enormous budget deficit and get control of our national debt. And I did favor the President's bipartisan deficit reduction commission. I think that was where we should have gone to at the end of last year. I was exceptionally disappointed that Congress, then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, refused to take a vote on the bipartisan commission's bill. And that's, I think, the kind of leadership and that's the kind of representation that we need. So while I've never favored a tax increase, I do favor finding some sort of grand compromise to fixing all these major issues facing our nation.
And key to victory, Charles, would be?
Working hard, connecting with the people. I think the people understand that the problem we have are jobs and just the lack of jobs around here in our community. We just don't see enough job creation here locally. We don't see enough job creation nationally. And, for me, I'm going to have to work extra hard to make sure I communicate my message to the voters of Hawaii. I am under no illusion of how challenging this race is going to be. Mm-hmm. It is not going to be easy at all by any stretch. but I think we can do it. This is something that I've run for before. I understand what it takes to be a good, effective congressman, and I look forward to bringing that message to the voters.
We're with Charles Djou, former congressman, now newly announced his intent as a candidate, and we're delighted that Charles is with us. I was able to wrap 4 questions into one. I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
But technically, question number 2. Understand that you're the only one being deployed out of your unit, and maybe you can help us understand why that is. And then just a secondary follow-up would be Dan Boylan gave a brief analysis of your candidacy and said it would be a benefit to, quote-unquote, wrap yourself in the flag. Now, I kind of bristled at that, and I kind of wanted to get your take and how it relates to your campaign.
Well, Rick, let me just say, leaving a wife who I dearly love, children who I absolutely adore, a community which I enjoy living in every single day, to go to a third world country that is in the middle of a war, in a combat zone, to serve in the United States Army, to confront the Taliban and extremist Islam, is not exactly, and do all that in the middle of trying to run a campaign for the United States Congress, I can assure you is not something I would intentionally try to do. Mm-hmm. With that said here, while I understand and recognize going and serving the country in Afghanistan right now is less than ideal, and it is extraordinarily disruptive to myself, to my family, and, of course, to my congressional campaign. I want to emphasize it is no more disruptive than what 100,000 American families are going through right now with a loved one in harm's way. And for me, I fully appreciate that the burden of defending our great nation does not fall evenly upon all families in America. And I'm just happy and proud that I can do my small part.
Moving along, there was question number 3. It has to do with the Tea Party. Can I just get your take on the Tea Party at large, and specifically any candidates that you might have an opinion about, or I should say, sitting members of Congress and other offices?
Sure. I think the Tea Party, I think they have, as President Obama put it, a very legitimate, serious concern. The Tea Party, I think, has been effective in crystallizing and bringing into focus the need to reduce spending and really get control of our nation's budgets. I've had good relationships with a lot of individuals who call themselves Tea Partiers, although I do not personally characterize myself as that. I think there are some individuals who are very closely associated with the Tea Party have, I think, become very good voices for our nation in Congress, such as, for example, I think newly elected Senator Rand Paul has become a very good senator. I do not see eye to eye with him on a lot of issues, but I do think he has brought a good voice and has overall helped the dialogue in our nation.
Would you be supportive of a candidate who identifies themselves as a Tea Partier, for instance, Michelle Bachmann, et cetera?
I know Michelle Bachmann very well. Mm-hmm. She and I got to know her real well when I was serving in the House of Representatives. Indeed, actually, I recall very specifically my first day in Congress. She was one of the warmest and friendliest individuals who came up and introduced herself to my wife and to my children. And so I really like her personally. I don't, however, see eye to eye with Michelle in all of her views and her policies. I, right now, have not specifically endorsed any particular candidate for president, but I have in the past and continue to hold that I think it's a good idea for somebody to have some sort of executive-level experience before they enter the White House. 4 years ago, and Rick, you and I have talked about this before, 4 years ago I had endorsed Rudy Giuliani for president. Of course, that probably says a lot about my presidential prognostication skills. I think for the 2012 elections, I thought very highly of now former candidate, former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. I thought former governor of Utah, John Huntsman, has a lot of executive skills, as does Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, and now newly entered candidate, current Texas Governor Rick Perry. And I think that's what our nation needs. We need somebody with real executive-level experience who's able to tackle these real major problems our nation is facing head-on.
We're talking with former Congressman Charles Djou, who is now a declared candidate for the 1st Congressional District. And it's good to chat with Charles at any point and at any time. Let's move on to question number 4, and I promise to be brief, but I'd love to get your take on, as you identified as the number one issue, and that's jobs. Under your vision, what is the key to job creation, and if elected, how would this come to pass? And just a brief comment on the possibility of what we call STEM 2, rumblings and such in Congress and at the White House today about that.
Well, let me begin by saying, Rick, that clearly, while Republicans and Democrats may vigorously disagree in terms of economic policy, I think the facts have become very clear that reckless government spending simply doesn't work. The Congress launched this massive stimulus program, the biggest increase in government spending to try and stimulate the economy is starting in 2009, when unemployment shot up from 5% to 7%. The theory behind the stimulus program back then was to prevent unemployment from ever cresting above 8%. It is today 9%. It has been above 9% for something like over 30 months. The stimulus program clearly did not stop unemployment from getting above 8%. For us here at home in the Aloha State, something like $1.3 billion in stimulus money has been spent locally in our economy, but only created something in the neighborhood of a little over 2,000 jobs. The math works out to something like $650,000 in taxpayer expenditures for every new job created as a result of stimulus here in Hawaii. So the answer is not in extra spending. It's not going to be in the government. Instead, what we need to do to turn around this economy is we got to free up small business. What we need to do is we got to get job creators back into the economy, get them excited, get them to invest their resources, and hire people. And the way you do that is not through spending, but getting the government out of the way. It means reducing the size of government and government regulation and government spending, allowing entrepreneurs to really get out there and do what they want to do, which is put their idea into motion, whatever the new product or new service that they want to offer to people. Government isn't the solution. Government has clearly proven to be the obstacle to new job creation. One of the interesting things I've constantly marveled over the economy over the last several months has been that a lot of companies actually have seen their cash positions increase over the last year, but they're unwilling to spend it because they are uncomfortable and they are not confident in the federal government. They just don't know which way the federal government is going to go. They're worried that if they expend their private money, the government's going to go in and tax it all away. And I think the recent downgrade of the federal government debt by Standard & Poor's, I think, is a clear indication of the exact sort of concern that job creators have and what we need to turn around in Washington, D.C.
And Charles, our final question for you, and again, aspiring to return to Congress. You cited jobs as number one, and I think there's a great amount of agreement. What are the other two specific issues that really are top of mind, and any potential solution as you see it to those two issues?
You know, Rick, I think it all revolves around jobs, and that really has to be our focus. But I think related to jobs is, for me, a concern with spending and our monster-sized national debt. We've got to get down to our annual budget deficits, and we've got to get control of our national debt. Towards that end, I have always supported a balanced budget amendment. Every family is required to balance their budgets, every small business, and indeed the majority of American states, including the state of Hawaii, are required to balance their books. It's about time that the federal government also balances books. And also to help stimulate and make sure that our economy gets on track here, I think it's important that we expand our markets. And that's why I have always been a champion of free trade. Something that I have always championed is to pass the free trade agreement between the United States and South Korea. It was something negotiated by President Bush and supported by President Obama. That's something that will generally help the United States, but specifically help the visitor industry here in Hawaii. Our future, the Japanese market is really pretty much matured for all of us here in Hawaii, but our future is in those growing Asian economies like South Korea. And that's also why I've supported, when I was a member of Congress, getting a free trade agreement with the Philippines. I think it's essential that we connect with these growing Asian economies for our nation as a whole, but for us here specifically in Hawaii, where we really got to turn around our economy. These are concrete proposals that I support that will help us create jobs.
Charles Djou, ladies and gentlemen, this edition of 5 Questions. Former congressman back on the campaign trail, and with an interlude of service as a major in the United States Army. Charles, we thank you so very much for taking the time as always. I hope
Thank you very much, Rick. I always appreciate coming on board. I'll be a little bit preoccupied starting next month for just a little while, but look forward to coming back and look forward to chatting again.
Okay, that is a deal. Thank you so much, Charles. All the best and aloha.
Take care. Aloha.
Bye now.